So next up is the panel discussion. I would also like to invite our panelists, Mr. Najib Khan on the stage, as well as Joe Pennychuck. Mr. Khan founded KGD Architecture along with Ned Krishbom and Jim Bradford of Fentress Architects in 2003. He is also a member of the Council of Architecture India, the Royal Institute of British Architects, and the American Institute of Architects. Over to you, John.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to ask the panel some questions. I can't guarantee that everyone will get questions, but let's see how we go. And hopefully you're not sick of statistics, because one I like using, if you look at New Zealand and you look at India, and you think a lot about scale. Both countries are so different. But if Auckland Airport was in India, it would be the 4th largest airport in India. In New Zealand, we have 1,000 people per aircraft. In India, there's 1.3 million people per aircraft. So there are a number of things in the aviation area where, from a New Zealand viewpoint, we actually know a lot about aviation and we have a lot to contribute, and we don't need to feel that we are a small partner in the relationship with India. So that's the commercial from a New Zealand viewpoint. My first question is to Arvind Mehra. You've talked quite a bit about general aviation. We have a huge general aviation industry in New Zealand, and I'm just wondering what needs to be done in India to develop a general aviation industry, and where will the initiatives to do that sort of thing come from?
It's very good in some sense to get the first question, and also a bit awkward when you get the first question immediately after lunch, because a lot of people are still enjoying the lunch, but that's an excuse for me not to give you a direct answer. But honestly, on the serious note, as I mentioned, I gave 3 examples. When I picked up Alaska, Botswana, and I gave New Zealand as an example. I should have mentioned in my presentation, actually, I had specific reference to the point that when you talk of 5 out of 10 regions in APAC belong to this region, it's very inappropriate to compare sizes of the countries, because there are countries like New Zealand, or as I mentioned, Botswana, with 2.2 million people who've done much better than India when it comes to general aviation. And one of the reasons why we haven't succeeded, number one, we had no specific regulations which govern general aviation. We treat general aviation at par with commercial aviation. There are only 24 plus aircraft flying in the country compared to 5,221 in New Zealand. That's one. Second thing is, I don't think the regulator till date had the compulsion to open up general aviation. The feeling was low-cost carriers, no problem, anybody can fly, or 25 million people can sit in the train, why bother? And we've been trying to push the government to say, if you do not promote regional to remote connectivity, you're not going to go anywhere. And we gave examples of US emergency air support system, New Zealand connectivity, how you utilize tourism to your advantage. And to be very fair, New Zealand general aviation business is one of the most expensive in terms of per seat pricing in general aviation. But still, you have people who are so to summarize, one, the regulator has to learn from experiences in other geographies, and that's where I mentioned that if New Zealand regulator, New Zealand companies can contribute and become and look at that market to be another expanding market, it'll be very important. And second thing is, when we introduce regional connectivity, we introduce regional connectivity in India using twin turboprops. Once again, we are defeating the purpose, because most twin turboprops which are being introduced are ATRs. They don't serve the purpose. Again, regional to remote connectivity is where India needs to open up to single engine, smaller aircrafts, and get out of that mindset that only if it's 2-engine aircraft that's safer, because statistics don't prove it. And these are a few things we have to do. But biggest thing I'll say, learn from other countries. and learn from experience. And I will not mind saying that we need to be humbling enough to say that our numbers will always look big because we are 1.2 billion. So we can't get clouded by number. We have to say in specific industry which country has better experience, and that's what we have to inherit and adopt.
So Graham Harris, who spoke very lately in the session just before lunch, can't be here, but I did talk to him at lunchtime, and he made the comment that from a regulator viewpoint, CAA is very keen to be collaborating with DGCA India, but there has to be a will on the part of on both parties for that to happen. But from a New Zealand viewpoint, we are very keen to engage with DGCA.
I think to that extent, somewhere companies like us will have to play a role. For example, we play a very significant role in bringing FAA or CASA from Australia into conversation. I have personally given a presentation because I'm a member of the Civil Aviation Advisory Council. I've given a presentation and I said, you got to learn from other countries. You got to learn from what FAA does better than us. So it's the private sector, it's the companies like us who are willing to expand, who will have to push forward. And as I said, plus we work with the New Zealand Trade, we work with such kind of forums to bring that awareness. And I wish sometimes we should bring the regulator. We brought the regulator to Australia, by the way. So we brought them into the plant. Yeah. And we showed them what general aviation means. And maybe I'll bring them next time to New Zealand.
So I'm now keen just to look at airports. We see there's a lot of growth occurring in India and big sums to be spent. I don't know how we want to tackle this, but Joe, even from a New Zealand viewpoint, what are some of the critical factors from your viewpoint that have allowed you to be successful in what we would see is a huge market?
Thanks, John. Well, just a little bit of history about our company. 2007, we started work in India. We were called up to Hyderabad on a bit of a rescue mission to look at all the food and beverage and retail within that space. And then that followed into 2008 with Mumbai International Terminal 2 upgrade. We actually built all the facilities in Christchurch, contained all of the joinery, and sent a team of 6 contractors up to Mumbai for 6 weeks, and we built the facilities there. So that was our first step into India, and we found that we had to really, to make more traction, we had to have a presence. Ken, you talked about making sure that we actually, if you're serious about entering into India, because we're so far away, that you have to have a good team that actually supports your team or your clientele. So we found that by having a base was a really good initiative, and we've actually grown from 1 person 2010 through to a team of 11 staff. We work with Najib Khan to my right on a lot of developments on an architectural level, but also for the food and beverage. Just finished in the Cebu International Airport, so as well. So we're working with GMR, GVK, and also AAI, which is quite strong point. So that's really how we actually we made our step into India and developed those airport facilities. Yeah.
Just from your viewpoint, would you like to comment on that, really from an Indian perspective?
The airport front?
Yes.
So the aviation, as you know, all the statistics, we have seen it. It's been growing tremendously in India, almost 20% travel. So airports also, it's not just a design. The design is more about the experience of travel. So that's a transformation happened in India. So before, if you look at Chennai airport or Bangalore airport, it's just a place to go in. So there is no experience of traveling. There is no retail experience. There is no F&B experience. There is no cultural experience. So now that has been changed. If you look at Mumbai Airport has the biggest museum in our country. It's right there in the airport. Bangalore has almost 80 restaurants within the airport. So this kind of a change is a great opportunity for everybody to pitch in. I think Jo's design, the airport we have done in Bangalore, she has done a lot of design. South Indian food places, Italian places, North Indian food. So I think today this opportunity is a great one. I think a lot of countries are participating. A lot of designers from different countries are coming and designing the airports, within the airport, accessories in the airport. A lot of stuff's happening.
So how do you find where in the value chain you should be targeting? If you are a New Zealand company, for example, how do you understand the value chain and where you should target?
Well, I guess it's understanding the market, definitely, for companies that have not necessarily had exposure to India in general. We're just talking about sort of coalitions and bringing like-minded companies together to actually service the requirements for developments. But I think, I've travelled for, 2018, 8 to 9 years up into India, so it's my second home. I know it very well, a lot of friends, a lot of colleagues, heavily involved with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, with the Delhi team, so you have a lot of support. We have a lot of support for what we do. It's also getting recognition for what our work in those regions, so that also then crosses over to recommendations, people do research, so it does take time, I think for New Zealand companies entering into the markets, it's really tapping into maybe companies that are already there and have the connections, and then using those collaborations and connections for their benefit.
So from an airline viewpoint then, where you have, say, existing relationships with New Zealand, and I think you both do have relationships from an airline viewpoint with New Zealand, how can those relationships be developed to bring other New Zealand companies to the fore so that you see them as options as well?
Well, let me break my answer into a few parts. Number one, yes, we do have partnership right at the moment with Hong Kong Airlines, and it's a one-stop product from Auckland into India by Hong Kong. So what we do in the partnership is we have joint marketing at times that we do, and in the New Zealand market, as a carrier, though we are not present as a direct airline, we position ourselves as flying from Auckland into India directly. So we have corporate contracts with SMEs in Auckland. We have corporate contracts back home in India, which give value adds to the corporates who fly between the two countries. And that's one way of building the bridge between the two nations. And what I hear in the sessions that in the morning is very encouraging. And actually, I was a bit overwhelmed by every speaker saying that there is a direct connectivity required between Auckland and India. Now, expansion is a very integral part of any airline. And there is a network planning team which each legacy carrier has, and it's a ongoing exercise that the network planning does to find out new routes, because unless and until you plan new routes, you don't go forward. Auckland, right at the moment, in the region of Asia Pacific, contributes to about 4% of the total revenue, which is not very large, but in terms of growth, it has shown double-digit growths. What I feel is we need to study the market. We need to kind of mature the market, and I take back the suggestions and the requirement that there has to be a direct connectivity, and let my network planners in head office do a study so that to see the commercial viability, because there are a lot of factors that need to be considered while developing or while studying a new route study.
Okay. Now, can I just be a little more specific then with the question, Suresh, because I think you do have a relationship with a New Zealand company on your crew resource management allocation process, and I just wonder then how that relationship, that experience with that New Zealand company encourages you to look at other options from New Zealand.
I had visited Merlot Aero yesterday, and there are quite a few opportunities they are already looking at the Indian carriers. Some of them have opted to use some of their software, but not all. And there are new airlines which are coming up in India. And even the present ones, because they are scaling up to a much higher level, they need the kind of software and the technology that companies like Merlot, I'm sure there are other companies also. I had the opportunity to meet Merlot this time, and I feel that those kind of opportunities will be there on the logistics side, on the software side, as far as operations management and things like that are concerned, which I understand the New Zealand IT companies are developing quite a bit. On the other side, as far as connectivity is concerned, if you are looking at flights, for instance, I mean, India is what I call a network market. I mean, if you operate a flight from, say, Auckland to Delhi, for instance, you may not be able to, first of all, we need to operate a wide-bodied aircraft. And you will not be able to fill up, we have 377 seats on that wide-bodied aircraft on a point-to-point basis. You need to have connectivity. I mean, there has to be, some passengers will be to Delhi, some passengers may be to Mumbai, some may be to Bangalore. That kind of connectivity is necessary. And so it is at a stage where we can possibly operate hub out of a particular airport and then fly. And that will take some time, as Paul mentioned.
I think one of the good things at conferences like this is the networking that is possible, and I take some encouragement from the New Zealand companies that are networking amongst themselves to see who is supplying who, and therefore who might help them start talking to the potential customer in India. So that to me is quite positive. Bennett, just the way the conversation went this morning, what if you were Prime Minister Modi, what is the thing that you would do to help the growth of the aviation sector in India?
Okay.
No pressure.
That's right. Okay, that's a good question. So I think the issue that India has faced over the last 15 years, and we sort of looked at what was the growth that we've experienced, I think because the growth has been so overwhelming that all the focus has been on dealing with the here and now and sort of firefighting. And there hasn't been much attention given to long-term planning. So it's all about how do we deal with today's issues. What we need is a sort of national aviation master plan that takes us through at least a generation, ideally through to about 2050. Because as I mentioned, we're talking about an industry which by 2050 could be 10 to 15 times the size of what it is today. And that's a massive undertaking for anybody. And if you don't have, I think one of the, I think there's been two very significant developments under this administration. And I'm not taking sides in terms of politics, but it has two things that have been very apparent. Well, not apparent. The two things that we've seen, but which are not so visible. Firstly is an improvement in corporate governance and transparency. I think that's a very important foundation for the future. The second is that aviation has at least been elevated in terms of priority within the government. And I think they recognize it, as somebody here mentioned this morning, that aviation has moved from being seen as an elitist activity for the wealthy to a fundamental component of economic infrastructure, that it drives development. And therefore, I think this government has been very clear that aviation needs more attention. But we still need that plan. They're working on it. We're pleased to see that when we hear statements from the ministry, it's no longer about what's happening next year or the year after. They have at least started talking about 2030, and I think that's a very significant development. But it will still take a little while to develop the plan, and then we have to follow that plan.
Can I just add to it with one word? In Hindi, there's a word called jugaad. Jugaad actually means, I think you can translate it as magic, or you can translate it as adjust, you know. In India, many of our planning is pretty bad. And we always try to manage with whatever. Managing in chaos is our expertise. And I have seen this in front of my eyes. I joined Jet Airways in '96. And at the time also we were talking about parking bays and space, counter space, everything. Even today we are talking the same thing. But some way I have seen this huge exponential expansion of the Indian aviation sector, and some way we have managed. I really do not know what will happen in the next 30 years, but I'm sure we have the resilience to manage that.
And I take from some of the confidence and some of the smiles that a lot of that growth will come from industry. And industry will have an important role to play. So I think as we wrap up this session, and it really puts a little bit of a closure to some of the conversation this morning before we focus much more on tourism. Just some interesting comments that have come from all of the speakers this morning. Big growth opportunities, but interesting to see the way the companies break those down into what does that mean for me? How can a heck of a lot. So what does that mean for me, and how can I take advantage of that opportunity? And I think we've been quite privileged to hear and see and get some of the insights from the airlines as to what you are doing to manage the growth for the future and take advantage of the growth for the future, but also the suppliers, be they suppliers to airlines or be they suppliers to airports. There's, again, a lot of very good, positive work happening, and it's a great base that we can go forward from. So thank you all very much for taking part in this panel, but also thank you very much for your presentations this morning. Thank you.